My fingernails dug crescents into my palms as I stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the two massive suitcases blocking my entryway. Their presence screamed louder than any words could. The air was thick with Sandra's cloying perfume, the same floral cloud that had haunted my Sundays for months, clinging to my hair, my clothes, my skin until I couldn't wash it off. A coat I didn't recognize had already claimed space on my carefully chosen bench, the one I'd agonized over in catalogs, and from the living room, Glenn's booming sports commentary thundered at a volume that made the picture frames tremble on the wall. "This can't be happening," I whispered, though the evidence was undeniable. Then Sandra appeared, wearing my apron as though it had always belonged to her. A smile stretched across her face that never quite reached her eyes. "Hope you don't mind," she said breezily. "We thought we'd stay a few nights. Glenn's back is acting up again, and it's easier not to drive back and forth. A few nights." She said it as if it were nothing, as if this wasn't the culmination of months of small invasions, as if my sanctuary could absorb her presence without breaking. My keys still clutched in one hand, grocery bags growing heavy in the other. I felt it wash over me. Not a sudden storm, but a tide I'd been watching rise for months, finally reaching my neck. "My name is Olivia. I need you to know that. I am 34 years old, a UX designer, a woman who worked for years in cramped apartments, balancing deadlines with dishes and laundry, carving out tiny corners of peace wherever I could. This house was supposed to be my reward. It had a sunlit breakfast nook, a small office with a door I could close, and a spare room I had dreamed of transforming into a yoga space. This house was supposed to be my sanctuary. Nolan, my husband, had been proud of it too. He should have been. His construction firm built it. He obsessed over every detail, running his hands across counters, checking every angle of the crown molding. It was supposed to be our home, our masterpiece. But from the very first visit, I should have known it would never truly belong to us. His father had commented stiffly about our quartz counters, flashy, he said, as though anything I chose was a performance. His mother had critiqued the pendant lights I hung over the island, asking pointedly if I'd considered softer tones. But I let it slide. Families meddle, I told myself. They'd come, they'd eat, they'd leave. But they didn't. It became every Sunday. No warning, no invitation, just the sound of tires on our driveway and voices in our foyer. "It's easier if we eat here," Sandra would say, "less cleanup for us," as though my kitchen, my sink, my energy were infinite resources meant to serve them. Glenn would immediately take over the living room, his voice blending with the drone of commentators on the TV. Sandra would hover in the kitchen, scrutinizing everything I touched. "You don't use garlic powder?" she asked once, tilting her head at me like I had admitted to not using soap. "I prefer fresh," I explained, smiling tightly. "Oh." Just that one word, heavy with judgment, as if I had confessed to a failing. Nolan would kiss her cheek and laugh. "You look great, Mom." He never noticed the way my shoulders tensed, the way I swallowed my irritation as I cooked for 5 instead of 2. Week after week I told myself it was fine. But resentment is quiet at first. It curls in your chest, small and tight, until one day you realize it's the only thing keeping you awake at night. When I suggested we skip one Sunday, just one, Nolan looked at me as though I'd suggested something cruel. "They mean well, Liv. You're overthinking it." I was always overthinking it, always the one expected to bend to host, to smile. One night, I tried another angle. While chopping peppers, I mentioned maybe my parents could come stay one night next month, just a short visit. Nolan froze. "Your parents overnight?" "Just one night," I assured him. He made a face. "Liv, your dad makes me feel like I'm at a job interview, and your mom, well, I'd have to be on, Be on," I repeated. "You mean polite. A decent human being." He shrugged, defensive. "They're not as easygoing as my parents." That was the moment something cracked inside me. The moment I realized my comfort, my needs, my family would always come second to his parents, or maybe they never even ranked at all. And then came the suitcases. I came home to find them already settled in the guest room. Sandra's silk robe draped across my chair. Glenn's slippers neatly placed by the door. The eucalyptus bundles I had hung for calm mornings were buried under the scent of menthol cream and cheap aftershave. At dinner, Sandra suggested I switch laundry detergents because the lavender makes Glenn's skin itch. Glenn added that the water pressure upstairs was too rough. I smiled thinly. I'll add it to my list, I said, my eyes flicking to Nolan, who chewed quietly, oblivious. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan as their footsteps echoed through the hallway. My muscles ached from holding in every word I wanted to scream. Between midnight and 2 a.m., I realized I had two choices: continue as the doormat in designer sweatpants or take back control of my life. I turned, picked up my phone, and sent a single message. Rebecca, do you still have that guest room? Her reply came instantly, always. The next morning, I made Nolan his coffee the way he liked it, extra hot with a splash of oat milk, and left it on the counter without a word. He didn't notice I hadn't made one for myself. Sandra was already in the kitchen wearing my robe, asking for chamomile tea that wasn't so flowery. Glenn shuffled in, yawning, blasting the television to volume 39. By Tuesday, Nolan casually mentioned they'd stay through the weekend. It's easier since they're already here. They've been here 5 days, I whispered. It's temporary, he said, eyes avoiding mine. I worked from the bedroom that night, my files spread across the floor while Sandra folded laundry beside me. Glenn barged in without knocking, asking where the HDMI cable was. Sandra looked at me, fluffing a towel, and said, "You should really think about boundaries, Olivia. Work-life balance matters." I almost laughed out loud. Boundaries in my house. When they went to brunch without inviting me, I called Rebecca. She listened, then said, "You sound like someone 5 seconds from torching a throw pillow." "I'm close," I admitted. "Then don't torch it," she said. "Be strategic, that's your thing." Strategic. The word lit something inside me. That night I told Nolan my aunt in Portland had broken her wrist and needed help. He barely looked up from his phone. "Drive safe." Sandra asked if I'd pre-made any meals before leaving. Glenn wanted to know if I'd fix the water pressure when I came back. I packed one small bag. Before leaving, I placed an envelope on my nightstand with a simple note: "I'll be gone for a while. If you need space now, you have it. Olivia." Rebecca welcomed me into her apartment with wine and silence. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled. Back at the house, my absence confused them. Nolan sent photos of his half-cooked lasagna, messages about broken washers, missing vacuum bags. I didn't respond. Sandra called, her voice suddenly sweet. "Are you planning to come back anytime soon?" "Why?" I asked. "You've got the whole house." Well, she hesitated. "We thought this was temporary." "So did I said, and hung up. It was only the beginning. The strangest thing about leaving wasn't the silence of Rebecca's apartment or the freedom of sleeping past dawn without the sound of Glenn's slippers shuffling down the hallway. The strangest thing was how quickly I adapted. It took less than a day for my body to unclench, for my breath to deepen, for my thoughts to flow again. That was when I knew just how much I had been suffocating inside my own home. At Rebecca's, life became simple again. We cooked dinner together, shared bottles of wine, laughed until our stomachs hurt. Her apartment wasn't large, but it was warm, quiet, safe. I set up my laptop at her kitchen table, lit a candle, and worked late into the night, the glow of the screen the only companion I needed. No one barged in asking for HDMI cables. No one folded laundry beside me with passive-aggressive comments about boundaries. Meanwhile, Nolan's world began to unravel. At first, his texts were lighthearted. "Got it under control. You'll see." He sent a blurry picture of burnt lasagna with the caption, "Chef Nolan." I almost smiled. But as the days stretched into weeks, the tone shifted. "Do you know where the vacuum bags are? The washer smells weird. Is that normal? Do you have Mom's chicken recipe written down?" I didn't respond. Each message felt like a confession, proof that the life I had held together for months was collapsing without me. Sandra called every other day. I let the phone ring until one afternoon I finally picked up. "Olivia, sweetheart," she cooed. "Are you planning to come back anytime soon?" "Why?" I asked calmly. "You've got the whole house." "Well, Glenn and I thought this arrangement was temporary." "So did I said before hanging up. For the first time, I let them sit in the discomfort they had created. Rebecca laughed when she saw me reading their desperate messages. "Amazing how fast it's not a big deal turns into help me. I'm drowning." And she was right, because Nolan was drowning. Within 2 weeks, his tone shifted from irritated to panicked. "I'm sorry, this is hard. I didn't realize how much you were juggling." But then inevitably he added, "Still, they're my parents. I can't kick them out." That single line told me everything. My pain had always been negotiable in his mind. My exhaustion, my boundaries, my needs. They were the sacrifices he expected me to make so his parents could be comfortable. He would never draw the line for me. I had to draw it myself. So I did. With Rebecca's help, I had a lawyer friend draft a separation agreement. Not divorce yet, just a clean line in writing. Property terms, financial arrangements all laid out. The house, after all, had been my down payment. The mortgage was in both our names, but the land title mine alone. A detail Nolan once told me didn't matter because it was ours anyway. Now that detail mattered more than anything. I emailed him the agreement one morning, attaching it to both his personal and work accounts, so there was no way to claim he hadn't seen it. He called within minutes, his voice panicked. "Olivia, what the hell is this?" "A boundary in writing," I said softly. "You're really doing this over a couple weekends." "It's never just a couple weekends and you know it." Silence. Then his voice cracked lower, smaller. "I can't afford this place on my own." "I know. So what, you're asking me to move out?" "No," I replied evenly. "I'm just saying if they're staying, I'm not." He didn't argue. Not that night, not for several nights after. But I knew he would try. He asked his mother to cook. She refused, saying she didn't want to interfere in Olivia's kitchen system. He asked Glenn to help fix the dishwasher. Glenn shrugged and ignored it. Sandra refused to do laundry because touching Olivia's clothes feels invasive. So Nolan began eating takeout, stacking containers in the sink until the kitchen reeked of grease and spoiled food. He texted me less and less, his cheerful bravado dissolving into silence. Then came the breaking point. He overdrew our joint account. When the bank alert popped up on my phone, I froze the card immediately. The call came within minutes. "You froze the account," he barked. "I moved my direct deposit," I said calmly. "You should do the same." "You can't just—" "We're separated, Nolan. You're not entitled to funds I'm not using." He cursed under his breath. Then finally he said the words I knew were coming. "Maybe we should sell the house." "That's up to you," I said. "But if you do, I get first right of refusal. It's in the paperwork." His breath hitched. "So what, you want it back now?" "No," I said quietly. "I just want the option. You've already filled it with your chosen residence." He hung up. A week later, I got the notification I had been waiting for. Our house was listed online. I clicked the link and felt my stomach twist, not with grief, but with something close to dark amusement. Photos of the house showed the living room cluttered with mismatched chairs, stacks of Glenn's magazines, and his ugly recliner shoved against the wall. In the kitchen, sticky notes were taped to drawers labeled "Do Not Touch." The guest room bed sagged under a pile of unwashed laundry. It didn't look like my home anymore. It looked like a Craigslist bachelor flat with parental chaperones. Rebecca peered over my shoulder and burst out laughing. "That bathroom shot looks like a crime scene. And to think you used to light candles in there." When the sale closed, it was below market value. The listing described it as a motivated seller, flexible timeline, minor repairs needed, a record fast closing for our neighborhood. But I didn't buy it back. I didn't need to. Because by then I had already signed the lease on a new townhouse. Smaller, simpler, but mine. It had a deep bathtub, a balcony that caught the afternoon sun, and most importantly, peace. Peace, I learned, doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like absence. Sometimes it sounds like silence. I filled my new home with things that made me feel alive again. Plants on the windowsills, soft blankets, books stacked haphazardly on the coffee table. I cooked when I wanted, worked late without guilt, slept without interruption. I saw my parents hosted brunches with friends, laughed in my kitchen without someone correcting my choice of garlic. One morning, 6 months after leaving, I bumped into a mutual friend at a cafe. She squinted at me before breaking into a smile. "Olivia, I didn't recognize you. You're glowing." I laughed. "It's amazing what sleep and peace can do." She leaned closer. "Have you heard about Nolan?" I shook my head. "Living with his parents. For now. It's a lot." I nodded slowly. "It always was." And that was the moment I knew I didn't regret walking away. I only regretted not doing it sooner. That evening, as Rebecca and I packed boxes for her upcoming move, she poured 2 glasses of wine. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked gently. I thought for a moment, staring at the packed boxes around us. "I regret not leaving earlier," I admitted. She smiled knowingly. "Want me to help you draft the divorce filing?" I grinned, lifting my glass. "Already done. The papers were signed last week." We clinked glasses to peace, to freedom, to finally breathing again. And in that moment, I understood something I'd been circling for months. Sometimes revenge isn't a scream or a fight or even a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes revenge is as simple as living well as walking away without a backward glance as choosing yourself every single time. It's strange the way the body remembers. Even after months in my new townhouse where every wall and window belonged only to me, my heart still pounded whenever I heard the faint rumble of tires outside. Some nights I jolted awake convinced I'd hear Glenn's booming laugh or Sandra's slippers on the hallway floor. The ghosts of their presence lingered in my nervous system, reminding me how deeply they had invaded my peace. I kept telling myself it was over. The house was gone. The weight of hosting the endless scrutiny, the humiliation of being treated like a guest in my own life, all of it was behind me. But betrayal doesn't simply leave when the door closes. It settles into your bones, resurfacing in small moments, demanding you re-examine every choice that brought you here. I thought often about Nolan. Not the husband I had at the end, but the boy I once fell in love with, the one who stayed up late drawing sketches for houses he dreamed of building, who kissed me softly in the mornings before rushing to the construction site. Where had that man gone? Had he ever really existed, or had he always been this version of himself? A son, first, a partner, second, a man incapable of choosing me when it mattered. One evening, as I was watering my balcony plants, my phone buzzed. A name I hadn't seen in months lit up the screen: Sandra. Against my better judgment, I let it ring twice before answering. Olivia, her voice was softer than I remembered. It's been a long time. Could we meet for coffee? Just to talk. I closed my eyes, gripping the railing. Months earlier, those words might have tugged at something in me, but now they felt like a trapdoor and opening back into chaos. No, Sandra, I said evenly. I don't think we have anything to talk about. A pause, then a sigh. I wanted to apologize. The word hung in the air, heavy and late. An apology after months of silence. An apology after tearing my sanctuary apart. An apology after cheering on my humiliation at that dining table. I don't need it, I whispered and ended the call. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel angry. I felt nothing. And maybe that was the truest sign I had finally moved on. Still, the universe has a way of circling people back into your orbit just when you least expect it. A few weeks later, while grocery shopping on a quiet Saturday, I turned the corner and nearly collided with Eleanor, my mother-in-law. She looked smaller somehow, her posture bent, her face lined with exhaustion. In her cart were only ready-made meals and discount snacks. Olivia, she breathed as though saying my name hurt. We stared at each other, two women bound by family, but no longer connected. I waited for the sharp remarks, the veiled critiques, but instead her eyes filled with tears. I miss you, she whispered. The family isn't the same. For a flicker of a moment, I saw her not as the woman who had judged my every choice, but as a mother whose son had crumbled under the weight of his own failures. I almost felt pity. Almost. But pity doesn't erase pain. I hope you find peace, Eleanor, I said quietly, then pushed my cart past hers. As I walked away, I realized something profound. For so long, I had craved their acknowledgement, their validation, their acceptance. But now I didn't need it. I wasn't angry anymore because their opinion of me no longer had the power to shape me. Back in my townhouse, I poured a glass of wine and sat on the balcony as the sun dipped low. The city lights flickered on one by one, and I thought about the life I had built since leaving. Work was thriving. My projects were flourishing. My clients respected me, and for the first time in years, my voice carried weight beyond the confines of my marriage. I had carved out a rhythm of mornings filled with quiet coffee, afternoons of creativity, and evenings where laughter returned to my lips. But even in the midst of this peace, scars remained. At night, I sometimes dreamed of my old home, the yoga room that never came to be the kitchen where I had chopped vegetables under Sandra's watchful gaze. I woke with an ache that was both nostalgia and grief. One night, Rebecca noticed my quietness. We were having dinner at her place, candles flickering between us. "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" she asked gently. I nodded. "It's like they're still haunting me. Not physically, but in my head. I keep replaying everything, wondering if I should have fought harder, yelled louder, left sooner." Rebecca reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You did what you had to do, and you left with your dignity intact. That's more than most can say." Her words settled in me like a balm. Dignity intact, that mattered. Because what my in-laws had never understood, what even Nolan had failed to see, was that I wasn't fighting just for space in a house. I was fighting for my right to exist without being diminished for the life I deserved after years of sacrificing. And that fight had cost me dearly. Months turned into a year. My divorce was finalized quietly with little drama. Nolan moved back in with his parents from what I heard. Friends told me he looked tired, older, weighed down. He had lost contracts at work, his reputation crumbling with the house he once bragged about building. Karma, I realized, was more patient than I ever could be. Still, part of me mourned. Not for him, not for them, but for the version of myself I had been, the woman who once believed she could win love through endless patience, through quiet endurance. That woman was gone, and though I didn't miss her, I grieved her innocence. On the anniversary of my leaving, Rebecca and I toasted with champagne on my balcony. To freedom, she said, raising her glass. To survival, I added. And as the bubbles fizzed on my tongue, I felt a clarity settle in my bones. Sometimes betrayal doesn't end with an explosion. Sometimes it ends with silence, the quiet you carve for yourself, the peace you refuse to surrender again. But I also knew deep down that my story wasn't finished. The scars would always whisper, the ghosts of my in-laws' voices would always linger, and perhaps one day they would try to step back into my life. But if they did, I would be ready. Because I was no longer the woman who clutched grocery bags in her hands while her home was invaded. I was no longer the woman who smiled politely through criticism. I was Olivia, the woman who had walked away, rebuilt, and learned that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply living fully, joyfully, unapologetically. By the time spring returned, I had thought I was past it. I had thought I had buried the bitterness, tucked away the jagged edges of betrayal in some drawer I'd never have to open again. But grief is a trickster. It comes back in unexpected waves, triggered by the smallest things, a certain perfume in the air, a careless laugh that sounds like Sandra's, the clink of dishes at brunch that reminds me of Sunday dinners I once hosted unwillingly. I was walking back from yoga one morning when I saw a familiar figure sitting on a park bench. Nolan. He was hunched forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the ground as though the weight of it might pull him through the earth. For a moment, I considered turning around, slipping away before he noticed. But something in me, the part that had once loved him, hesitated. He looked up and saw me. His face broke into something between relief and shame. "Olivia," he said softly, as though the name itself was forbidden. I didn't sit beside him, but I stayed standing, arms folded. "Nolan, you look good," he said after a pause, eyes scanning my posture, my calm. He seemed smaller than I remembered. His once broad confidence reduced to a tired man who had lost too much. "Life's been different," I replied. He nodded slowly. "Hard for me, too." His voice cracked, and for a moment I saw him as I had in the beginning, earnest, vulnerable before the lies, before the blind loyalty to his parents. "I didn't realize until too late how much you carried, how much I let happen." I stared at him, trying to summon anger, but instead I felt only exhaustion. "You realized when you lost me, not before." His shoulders sagged. He didn't argue because there was no defense left to give. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he whispered. "For everything. For letting them walk all over us. For choosing silence when I should have chosen you." Once those words might have been everything I longed for. But now they felt like a letter delivered after the house had already burned down. Too late to matter, too late to rebuild. "I don't need your apology," I said quietly. "I needed your presence back then. And you couldn't give it." He closed his eyes as though the truth pierced deeper than any insult. When I walked away from him that morning, I didn't look back. My chest ached, yes, but it was the ache of release, not regret. For the first time, I knew with certainty there was no part of me that wanted to return. Weeks later, Sandra found her way back into my life. She showed up outside my office building, her voice carrying that same brittle cheerfulness. "Olivia, just a moment, please." I turned weary. "Sandra." She wrung her hands, her smile faltering. "I wanted to see you, to explain." I raised an eyebrow. "Explain what?" "That you moved into my home without permission. That you tore down every ounce of peace I built." Her eyes glistened, but I knew better than to believe in crocodile tears. Still, her voice quivered with something close to sincerity. "We thought we were helping Nolan. We thought If we stayed close, if we made life easier, he would thrive. I didn't see how much I was taking from you. I didn't see you. The irony stung. Because all I had ever wanted was to be seen not as the accommodating wife, not as the hostess, but as a person. You didn't want to see me, I said softly. You wanted to erase me. She flinched as if slapped. That's not true. It is, I replied firmly. And the truth is, I survived in spite of you, not because of you. Her face crumpled, and for the first time, she didn't fight back. She didn't argue or scold. She simply turned and walked away, her figure shrinking into the crowd until she was gone. That night, I sat on my balcony with Rebecca, telling her about both encounters. She listened, sipping her wine thoughtfully. You know what's wild? She finally said. They all think they can rewrite the story now. Pretend it wasn't as bad, soften their guilt with half apologies. But you don't owe them the comfort of that. I nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. Because she was right. Apologies were not erasers. They couldn't scrub away the nights I lay awake while Sandra criticized my detergent, or the mornings Nolan ignored my quiet pleas for peace. By summer, I had built something stronger than forgiveness, indifference. They could speak, they could regret, they could ache for what they lost, but I no longer needed to carry it. Yet the emotional climax came not from them, but from me. It was a humid July night when I hosted my first dinner party in my townhouse. Friends gathered around the table, candles, flickering music playing softly in the background. Laughter filled the air, not sharp or judgmental, but warm and genuine. I stood in the kitchen pouring wine, and a sudden wave of emotion overcame me. The sound of joy in my home, untainted by criticism or intrusion, felt almost overwhelming. For months, I had lived on edge, waiting for footsteps in the hallway, for voices raised in disapproval. And now, silence except for laughter, I chose. Tears pricked my eyes. I excused myself to the balcony, gripping the railing as the city buzzed below. My chest heaved with sobs I hadn't realized I was holding in. It wasn't grief, it wasn't regret, it was release. Release from years of bending myself smaller, of apologizing for existing, of waiting for Nolan to choose me, and realizing he never would. Release from Sandra's sharp eyes, Glenn's noise, Eleanor's disapproval. Release from the version of me who thought enduring was the same as loving. Rebecca found me there, silent tears streaking my face. She wrapped her arms around me without a word, and I let the sobs flow until they softened into laughter. This, I whispered, this is what home is supposed to feel like. Not a prison, not a stage for someone else's comfort, but a sanctuary. And in that moment, I finally understood my revenge had never been about making them suffer. My revenge was the life I rebuilt without them, the joy they could never steal again, the freedom they would never taste. The weeks after that dinner party felt like waking into a new life. My home was no longer just four walls and a roof, it was a declaration, a sanctuary, a place where only chosen voices could enter. I filled it with laughter, with plants that thrived in the sunlight, with books scattered across tables and blankets left in cozy disarray. Every corner carried my imprint, not theirs. But sometimes, late at night, I would still wonder, why had I endured for so long? Why had I allowed them to dictate the terms of my peace? The answer came slowly in quiet reflections. Because I believed love meant sacrifice. Because I thought being a good wife meant swallowing discomfort, proving patience. Because somewhere deep down I feared that if I said no, I'd be abandoned. And in a way I was. But abandonment turned out not to be the end, it was the beginning. Nolan didn't reach out again after that park encounter. Word drifted to me through friends he had moved back in with his parents. His once bright career was crumbling, contracts slipping away as his reputation soured. He was still building houses, but none of them felt like homes. Sandra tried once more, leaving a message on my voicemail. I hope you can forgive us someday. We only wanted what was best for Nolan. I deleted it without listening to the end. Because what she never understood was that what was best for Nolan had destroyed me, and I no longer cared to educate her on the difference. Months passed and the seasons turned again. On a crisp autumn evening, I found myself walking past my old neighborhood. Our house was no longer ours. It belonged to strangers now. New curtains hung in the windows, children's toys littered the yard, and a different family's laughter spilled out into the night. I stopped at the curb, staring for a long moment. A pang of grief stabbed through me, but then, peace. Because it was no longer my burden. That chapter was sealed the house no longer a monument to my pain, but simply a structure repurposed, reclaimed by lives that had nothing to do with mine. I whispered under my breath goodbye and turned away. That night, I journaled late into the evening. I wrote about the woman I had been, the Olivia who tiptoed around criticism, who cooked meals for uninvited guests, who smiled through clenched teeth as her sanctuary was stripped away. I honored her because she did what she thought she had to do. But I also let her go. And I wrote about the woman I had become, the Olivia who walked away, who built a new home, who chose herself, even when it meant starting over. It wasn't bitterness I felt. It was gratitude. Because betrayal had taught me something no amount of comfort ever could, that boundaries are not walls to keep people out, but doors that decide who is worthy of entering. In time, I began to share my story. At first with friends, then with colleagues, and eventually with women who reached out quietly, confessing their own struggles. One evening at a small gathering, I stood before a group of women and spoke. I thought I was weak for leaving, I told them. But the truth is, I was weak for staying. The strongest thing I ever did was admit I deserved more. And once you realize that, once you claim your worth, no one can take it from you again. The room was silent for a moment, then filled with applause. Not the polite kind, but the kind that comes from recognition, from resonance. Tears shimmered in a few eyes, and I realized my story had become more than survival. It had become permission for others to walk away too. Rebecca grinned at me afterward, pride shining in her face. See, you're not just surviving anymore, you're leading. She was right. The final thread came months later in the form of a letter. Handwritten, shaky. From Eleanor. Olivia. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to respond. I only want you to know that I see now what I didn't then. I see the weight you carried. I see the pain we caused. And I'm sorry. I read it once, then tucked it into a drawer. Not to cherish, not to clutch like a prize, but simply to acknowledge that even those who once hurt us deeply can sometimes awaken too late. And then I left it behind. Because the truth is, I didn't need their apologies. I didn't need Nolan's regret, Sandra's explanations, or Eleanor's letter. My healing had never depended on them. It depended only on me. On a golden October afternoon, as the sunlight spilled into my living room, I curled up on the couch with a book, a blanket, and a glass of wine. My phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca. Dinner tonight, my treat. I smiled, replying, yes, I'll bring dessert. And as I set the book aside, I realized I had everything I needed. Peace, freedom, friendship, self-respect. The family that once invaded my home had lost its hold on me. They thought they could make themselves permanent. But the only permanence they left behind was the lesson they unknowingly taught me, that when you reclaim your life, no one can ever take it back again. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's not about fireworks or destruction. Sometimes it's simply living well, joyfully, authentically, in a way they will never know. And that, in the end, is the sweetest form of karma. So if you're listening to my story now, if you've ever felt erased in your own life, if you've ever wondered whether you deserve better, the answer is yes, you do. And sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is walk away from the table they built for themselves and build your own. Because in the end, betrayal doesn't define you. Your response does. And choosing yourself, that's the victory no one can steal. If my story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own strength, or gave you the courage to see your worth, I hope you'll stay with me here. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of resilience and rebirth. And tell me in the comments, what did betrayal teach you about yourself?